Okay, welcome back, Peter, to podcast episode number 27.
Cool. Welcome.
Oh. So today we're going to be going through a short, I think it's somewhat of a classic self-help book, but not like a modern self-help classic, like a slightly older self-help classic. So for those who are wanting to look at it, and you can actually get it for free online and stuff, and then you can get fairly cheap copies as well, if you want the physical copy. Should we give a quick book summary and then dig into it?
Yeah, can.
Cool. Okay, so As a Man Thinketh by James Allen is a book about how our thoughts shape our reality. To quote from the book, this little volume, its object being to stimulate men and women to the discovery and perception of the truth that they themselves are the makers of themselves by virtue of the thoughts which they choose and encourage. That mind is the master weaver, both of the inner garment of character and the outer garment of circumstance. And that's it. The summary is basically from the forward of the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any additions or thoughts there.
No. I think I just want to add on to say, the book is about how I think how our thoughts shape a lot of things. You know, how I don't want to say, but I will say that like we have the power to change things, at a level that I think we don't always comprehend. And I think it reminded me of there was a certain book that we did. I think it should be this year, but it was speaking about how like if we dwell in negativity, then, we'll be in a funk, and, everything we do or regard will be negative. But if we think positively about things, I almost want to say it was Monk that saw this Ferrari. But yeah.
Could be,
yeah. And yeah, that, if we keep our thoughts positive and pure, then that actually also affects our outlook on life and how we approach different things.
I think it's I mean, a lot of the things in this kind of a book are, I think, fairly obvious if you think about them carefully, but they're like, and some of them are framed in a little bit of a weird way, like that, like you kind of like what you were saying, you have more power to change things than often one would give themselves credit for. Not in like some strange mystical sense, but just in the sense of like, if you continue to do exercise and you're just consistent in it, you can be healthier. If you continue to learn things, you will grow wiser. If you continue to do X, Y, and Z, then circumstances can improve. But also, if you take small deviations in a negative direction, you can end up in a really bad place. And I found it interesting. A lot of the book has quite blunt and harsh, like, ways of putting things. That doesn't mean that they aren't useful. It's just that some of them can feel quite jarring, especially to someone that's like, I don't know, in a sensitive place, and they feel like this situation that they're in is just like not of their own making. It's just circumstance and things, and there's obviously can be elements of truth to that as well. And so this kind of a book, I think if someone in that mind frame is reading it, they might feel a little bit blindsided. But overall, I think it's a really good read, and it's a really worthwhile set of things to think through. Cool. Should we dig into it?
Yeah.
Okay, so the forward, I'm just going to reread the part of it again. So this little volume, its object being to stimulate men and women to the discovery and perception of the truth that they themselves are the makers of themselves by virtue of the thoughts which they choose and encourage. That mind is the master weaver both of the inner garment of character and the outer garment of circumstance. So I think the only additional thing to add there, because we spoke about it a little bit now, but the only additional thing from my side is that it's not just the inner circumstance. Like if you face a difficult situation, if you have continuously in difficult situations made an effort to be like, okay, I'm not going to be frustrated by this or annoyed by it or feel unnecessary pressure from the situation. If you continuously train yourself to react in that way, then your inner character is shaped in what I would say is a healthy way. And so that's the one aspect of it. But then there's also the outer garment, so the way that one is in the world, or the things that happen in the world. That the way that you think about things shapes both of those things. So often one might say it deals with the inner character, and then maybe a Stoic way of saying is like the things in the outside world, I can't affect them. Depends on how you view it and things. And Stoics may not sort of phrase it exactly like that. But it's sort of saying, okay, the inner character I can control, but the outer I can't. And James Allen is saying, well, but you do have some influence over that outer garment, the outer world, the outer like character that you portray as well. And it's more so than you would initially think. Yeah. Cool. Should we head to the next section? Thought and character.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to do the usual, just jumping through, and then we'll chat through the different pieces. So the title of the section is, like I said, Thought and Character, and there's two little pieces that I'm going to read from it, starting on page 7. The aphorism, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, not only embraces the whole of a man's being, but is so comprehensive as to reach out to every condition and circumstance of his life. A man literally is what he thinks, his character being the complete sum of all his thoughts. And then a different way that he puts it a little bit later is, every act of man springs from the hidden seeds of thought. And then lastly, on page 9, he says, a noble and godlike character is not a thing of favor or chance, but it is a natural result of continued right effort in thinking, the effect of long-cherished association with godlike thoughts. Yeah, so it's, I suppose, similar to what we were saying earlier, where often we would be like, oh, okay, that person is just a good person or something like that. And he's kind of challenging that and saying, no, not really. The good person is someone who has spent time trying to, or cherishing, I guess, the good in things and trying to strive towards that good. And that's what ends up being a good person. It doesn't just sort of magically happen. And I think there is an element of truth to that. Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting way of phrasing it. I actually didn't think of it like that when I read that part. But yeah, it's you just don't become a nice person overnight, I would say. It's based on a natural progression of how you responded to things from when you're young, growing up. So that's actually very interesting to think about it in that regard. And I think just going back to what you said, the first part of saying that a man is literally what he thinks, his character being the complete sum of all his thoughts. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, to be like, if you're exposing yourself to negative situations, then you will constantly be thinking about negativity. And as a result, the things that your responses towards things will most likely lean towards the negative side. So, yeah, and I think when I read this, I know, weird and off the tangent, like the first thing that came to me was like the superposition of wavelengths. Don't ask me why, but my mind went there. But yeah, it just for waves to grow. Like, I mean, if you think of sine waves, sinusoidal waves, as the full name goes, is in parts where one wave, let's say in the positive orientation and one in the negative orientation meets, then it becomes baseline. And for those where it cancels out, and in a way they're both on the positive side, then that actually adds, So it's like thinking about it, that's who we are, our characters. If we combine, good thoughts will equal further good thoughts, good and bad will, neutral state. And if it's just negative, then you're just going down that rabbit hole. I mean, that was just my way of visualizing it. And yeah, I think also just by that, it's like and I mean, thinking about it now, we just have to be very conscious about our thoughts, we need to take charge of them, and kind of really understand the power of one's thoughts, because essentially that's then what happens when you're responding to people. It's based on what your thoughts are. You end up responding negatively to everything that you kind of encounter, or you're faced with, and because that's what your characters become, it's a summation of all your negative thoughts. So yeah, very important to always think the good light, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like, it sounds like such an obvious and a cheesy thing, but, and not to sound fancy, it's going to sound fancy, but like, I think it's very straightforward that the more you think about negative things, the more you are going to strengthen the neural pathways for your negative thoughts. And so you basically, like, if you don't try and catch yourself when you start going down the negative thought train, even if it's for a valid reason, like, oh, I'm in a really difficult situation and this isn't great. If you just naturally allow yourself to do that, then, because a lot of difficult things happen in life, that's just part of life. Sort of, to use an idea from a previous book, it's like, I think it's the 4,000 Weeks book, where we actually don't want a problem-free life, because that would be, if everything was solved, like, what's almost even the point of...
Yeah, what's the purpose of life?
Yeah, like, there needs to be things to do and stuff that gives us meaning and so on. The whole heaven idea is a separate discussion, which is an interesting one. But if you think about that, and you say, okay, well, life is going to be full of problems, and that we're going to have to solve them and so on. If every time you run into a negative situation or problem or difficulty, if you're negative about that, rather than trying to say, okay, like, figure out some positive way of framing it, then those neural pathways will default, they will be strengthened in the negative direction, if that makes sense. Versus if you are continuously trying to push them towards the positive, you will then, over time, naturally, it's not, the difficult thing isn't going to be the positive thought. The difficult thing will be the negative thought. Because that's the way that you've strengthened the direction of your mind. So, yeah, and then of course, over the long term, that plays out in your character, because I guess to some degree, your character is the sum of how you behave in certain situations. And so if you're always frustrated and annoyed and anxious or this or that in situations, then that is what people will say that's that person's character. Yeah. So I think it's a very difficult thing to grapple with, but it's an important one, that the way that you think about things really does shape who you become. And I think it's said by James Allen, but it's also said by many other people because it rings true. Yeah. All right. Should we go on to the next one? Effects on circumstances, or the effects of thought on circumstances. So we just dealt with thoughts on character, and now we're going to do the other side, thoughts on circumstance. Interestingly, this is one of the longest sections in the book, and so I've got the most little hops around. I'm going to do about half of the hops, and then we can pause, and then I'll do the second half of the hops. So I'll go up to about page 20. Okay, so starting on 13, effect of thought on circumstances. And then he says, a man's mind may be likened to a garden, which may be intelligently cultivated or allowed to run wild. But whether cultivated or neglected, it must and will bring forth. If no useful seeds are put into it, then an abundance of useless weed seeds will fall therein, and will continue to produce their kind. Then on page 14, thought and character are one. And as character can only manifest and discover itself through environment and circumstance, the outer conditions of a person's life will always be found to be harmoniously related to the inner state. Then on 15, a man is pushed around by circumstances so long as he believes himself to be the creature of outside conditions. But when he realizes that he is the creative power, and that he may command that hidden soil and the seeds of his being out of which circumstances grow, then he becomes the rightful master of himself. Then to page 16. Every thought seed sown or allowed to fall into the mind and to take root there produces its own blossoming sooner and later into act, and bearing its own fruitage of opportunity and circumstances. Good thoughts bear good fruit, bad thoughts bear bad fruit. Then a little bit further down, as the reaper of his own harvest, man learns both by suffering and bliss. And then page 17. A man does not come to jail by the tyranny of fate or circumstance, but by the pathway of grovelling thoughts and base desires. Nor does a pure-minded man fall suddenly into crime by stress of any mere external force. The criminal thought had long been secretly fostering in the heart, and the hour of opportunity revealed its gathered power. Circumstance does not make the man, it reveals him to himself. And then on page 20, men are anxious to improve their circumstances, but are unwilling to improve themselves. Then a bit further down, here's a man who is wretchedly poor. He is extremely anxious that his surroundings and home comforts should be improved, yet all the time he shirks his work and considers he is justified in trying to deceive his employer on the grounds of insufficient wages. And then on the other side, here is a rich man who is the victim of painful and persistent disease as the result of gluttony. He is willing to give large sums of money to get rid of it, but he will not sacrifice his gluttonous desires. Cool, that's about halfway through that chapter, so we'll pause there for a little bit. I don't know if you have some thoughts there, Peter.
I think what stood out to me was on page 17 that circumstance does not make the man, it reveals him to himself. Yeah, I mean, that's... I would tie it back to something unrelated, but I remember also when I moved to PE, I mean, which was first year, I remember during orientation, there was this, I think, Long Walk to Freedom had just been released, and they were having like a countrywide tour, and like we were fortunate enough to go to one of the book launches. And I remember one of the question was about describing what one's character is, and I remember one of the one answer that, and to this day, stands out. And I think I'd forgotten the guy. I remember the guy who even answered it because they ended up being in the same stream. But I remember him saying that one's character is drawn from what someone would do when they're alone. So when no one's watching and whatnot, and just how I want to tie this into this is those are like those circumstances you face, when you feel the most safe and no one's watching. It's how you react in those situations that show who you are. And this is what it's saying, that, it's not the circumstance that kind of describes your character, but it's like in your reaction to this circumstance, your character comes out, and that's what reveals to you. And like tying back to that, it's like how you react to your circumstance, and we touched it on previously to be like, is from your thoughts. So, that's how I kind of formed that link. So I think, that was one thing that really, really stood out to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like that where it says men are anxious to improve their circumstances but are unwilling to improve themselves. And the thing is that you need to do it the opposite way around, not trying to improve your circumstances, but the circumstances end up just revealing what has been happening almost behind the scenes the whole time, to some effect. But to tie some of the pieces together for me, I think I really liked the garden metaphor. I often do like the gardening metaphors, where it's like the idea of, if you essentially don't tend to your garden, it's going to produce bad fruit or weeds and those kinds of things. Whereas if you tend to it, then you're likely to produce good fruit. And if you are tending to the garden of your mind in some sense, then the outworking of that can be good, not just mentally, but also circumstantially, because, just of the various different ways that it can play out. And I think, as you said as well, where that the circumstance does not make a man, it reveals himself to himself. I think also one step back from that, the criminal thought had been long secretly fostered in the heart, and the hour of opportunity revealed its gathered power, which is in some sense to say, like, if you think about how things usually play out, if you are sort of in the back of your mind always wanting things that you can't have, and whether it's like from the perspective of financial things or relationship things or whatever it is, that desire and allowing that to foster in your mind, you have shaped your mind to act in a certain way. And given the opportunity, if it's sort of presented in an unfortunate way, then you might act out on it, whether it's by stealing something or sleeping with someone that you shouldn't have, or whatever the case is. Like that can play out in a very dramatic way, because you've been in your mind, you've been sort of allowing this thing to foster in an unhealthy way. But if we continuously tend to that, and we look after the garden of our mind, and we try and foster it towards virtuous and good thoughts, then that circumstance can play out very differently. Yeah, and then I also like, I think it hits home for the way that he portrayed it with the poor versus the rich man. We would say, okay, the poor man is unfortunate and the rich man is fortunate. But both the poor man and the rich man can act in ways that aren't helpful. Where the poor man can say, this sucks, everything is terrible, and therefore he doesn't do his perform his duties and responsibilities to a high standard, which obviously isn't good, and it's not going to really get someone anywhere. But then on the other hand, the rich man, that might not be an issue, but they might act out in other unhelpful ways. For example, gluttony and eating too much and things like that, or buying too many material things. And then in the health sort of sphere, because of the gluttony, then you end up with a health condition that, you basically would kind of pay large sums of money to get rid of, because, as it said earlier, men are anxious to improve their circumstances, but unwilling to improve themselves. So if you work on yourself, you are more likely to not have those sort of distorted desires, whether it's like the gluttonous eating and stuff like that. Which I am no saint when it comes there. Okay, should we go to the next few snippets?
Yeah.
Okay, so on page 23, the honest man reaps the good results of his honest thoughts and acts. He also brings upon himself the sufferings which his vices produce. The dishonest man, likewise, garners his own suffering and happiness. Then on 24, it's pleasing to human vanity to believe that one suffers because of one's virtue, but not until a man has gotten rid of every sickly, bitter, and impure thought from his mind, and washed every sinful stain of his soul, can he be in a position to know and declare that his sufferings are the result of his good and not his bad qualities. And then going to page 26. Man only begins to be a man when he ceases to accuse others as the cause of his condition, and builds himself up in strong and noble thoughts, ceases to kick against circumstances, but begins to use them as aids to more rapid progress. And then on page 27, let man radically alter his thoughts, and he will be astonished at the rapid transformation it will effect in material conditions of his life. Then he gives some examples. Bestial thoughts crystallize into habits of drunkenness and sensuality, which solidify into circumstances of destruction and disease. And then on the opposite side, on the other hand, beautiful thoughts of all kinds crystallize into habits of grace and kindliness, which solidify into genial and sunny circumstances. And then lastly on page 29, a particular train of thought persisted in, be it good or bad, cannot fail to produce its results on character and circumstance. A man cannot directly choose his circumstances, but he can choose his thoughts, and so indirectly, yet surely, shape his circumstances. So yeah, like it kind of ends off there. Even though James Allen admits that you can't directly shape your circumstances. To some degree, there's chance and all kinds of things involved. But he also says, undoubtedly, if you continually persist in a good thought, good train of thought, or a bad train of thought, that will produce its fruits. And which in turn through whatever mechanisms will result in good or bad outcomes. And then he gives those examples of beautiful thoughts crystallizing into habits of grace and kindliness, which then turn out into good and basically nice circumstances, whereas the bestial thoughts, the negative, bad thoughts, crystallize into habits of drunkenness and sensuality, and those solidify into circumstances of destruction and disease. Yeah. I don't know if you have some other thoughts to add there, Peter.
No, I think you've covered
Cool.
most of it there, yeah.
Okay, then the next is the effect of thought on health and the body. So I'm going to read through another few snippets there. So on page 33, the body is the servant of the mind. It obeys the operations of the mind. At the bidding of unlawful thoughts, the body sinks rapidly into disease and decay. At the command of glad and beautiful thoughts, it becomes clothed with usefulness, youthfulness, and beauty. Then on page 34, change of diet will not help a man who will not change his thoughts. When a man makes his thoughts pure, he no longer desires impure food. Then 35, if you want to perfect your body, guard against your mind, or guard your mind, If you want to renew your body, beautify your mind. Thoughts of malice, envy, disappointment, despondency rob the body of its health and grace. A sour face does not come by chance. It is made by sour thoughts. And then lastly on 37, there's no physician like cheerful thoughts of dissipating. There's no physician like cheerful thoughts for dissipating the ills of the body. There's no comforter to compare with the good will for dispersing the shadows of grief and sorrow. To live continually in thoughts of ill will, cynicism, suspicion, and envy is to be confined in a self-made prison hole. But to think well of all, to be cheerful with all, to patiently learn to find the good in all, such unselfish thoughts are the very portals of heaven, and to dwell day by day in thoughts of peace towards every creature will bring abounding peace to their possessor. Yeah, I think it's kind of the similar theme, but now just shifted towards the outworking on the health of your body. And so negative thoughts result in disease and decay, and positive thoughts result in youthfulness. And I think even from like I don't know much about, physiology, the body and all the different things there. I don't really know much about it, but I think it's fairly common knowledge that stress produces basically things in your body that make you weak and more likely to get sick and all those kinds of things. And yeah, kindness and sort of patience and those kind of thoughts and outlooks are, I guess, calming. And so even from that perspective, there's merit to say, if you're constantly down and out versus if you have a positive outlook on life, you're going to be healthier or unhealthier, depending. Maybe a last comment and then I'll hand over to you, is it also reminds me of there's those situations where a couple is married for a very long period of time, say like 40 years, 50 years, and then the partner passes away. And then shortly after that, the other partner passes away because it's just the outlook of life and meaning and things like that. Once one of your closest friends or partner has passed away, it just becomes very difficult to to have a positive outlook. I would assume that that's what's happening in those kind of cases. Obviously, yeah, there's also other related things, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know, not from the book, and also just from like other things that I've heard, like for instance, how like if someone's sick, very ill, the moment they start, losing that light and losing that hope, you often hear that that's when, their health also deteriorates, and in turn, it's like when the positive and like, I mean, not in all instances, but in most cases, they'll tell you that also helps towards recovery, and I feel it's related to this section, another thing that stood out to me, it's the whole thing of, if you want to better your body, then you have to think better about certain things. So eat better food, you have to incorporate a better routine, and that comes about through thought. You have to think through these things, so yeah, it's like, it's in the book, but I think it's something that a lot of people share the same sentiment, I mean, for one, I can say I've always struggled with weight, and like, I think for the first time, notably, that, I've actually seen my weight go down is having that different approach to think about the foods that I consume, and I mean, they always say like it's 80% diet, 30% or 20% exercise,
Yeah.
Not that I have any facts or any stats to back that up that I can point you at, but I can say that to some degree I sort of agree, so yeah, I think it's very important to understand that, the way our outlook and the way we think about different things does affect a lot of things. And our body being one. And I mean, you did also mention the whole thing of where if you're stressed, it does start to show your body, in your face, and just your energy, your demeanor and all, And I mean, stress is, a mental health challenge, back in the whole thing that your thoughts do have affect your body.
Yeah, no, it's true. Right, should we go on to thought and purpose? Okay, so the next chapter, thought and purpose, starting on 39. A man should conceive of a legitimate purpose in his heart and set out to accomplish it. He should make this purpose the centralizing point of his thoughts. It may take the form of a spiritual ideal, or it may be a worldly object, according to his nature at the time being. But whichever it is, he should steadily focus his thought forces upon it, and upon the object which he has set before himself. He should make this purpose his supreme duty, and devote himself to its attainment, not allowing his thoughts to wander away into ephemeral fancies, longings, and imaginings. Even if he fails again and again to accomplish his purpose, the strength of character gained will be the measure of his true success. Then a bit further down, those who are not prepared for the appreciation of a great purpose should fix their thoughts upon the faultless performance of their duty, no matter how insignificant their task may appear. Then on page 41, the weakest soul, knowing his own weakness and believing this truth, that strength can only be developed by effort and practice, will thus, believing, at once begin to exert itself, and adding effort to effort, patience to patience, and strength to strength, will never cease to develop, and it will grow, at last divinely strong. And then, page 42. Having conceived of his purpose, a man should mentally mark out a straight pathway to its achievement, looking neither to the right nor the left. Doubts and fears should be rigorously excluded. These are disintegrating elements which break up the straight line of effort, rendering it crooked and ineffectual and useless. Yeah, so I think tying thought and purpose, kind of as he's saying at the beginning, it's good to try and identify a purpose and to strive towards that purpose. And then if you feel like, oh, I don't really have a purpose, then make it your purpose that you do the job that you have or the duties that you have to the best degree possible. And then in doing that, even a weak character, I know that sentence, the paragraph about the weakest soul knowing its own weakness and believing the truth, that strength can only be developed by effort and practice, and then it carries on. I know that was a little bit confusing in the way that it reads, but essentially it's sort of saying, even if someone is weak in their mental capacities and mental strength in terms of, I guess, thought and virtue, that person, if they continually put effort towards the direction that they want to go, the good, hopefully, or if they continuously practice that they will never cease to develop. So they won't ever stop developing. They'll continue to grow and improve. And so, yeah, the identifying that thought or that purpose and then striving towards that and continually growing, I think is what he's getting at. And then lastly, for when you've identified that purpose or the duties that you need to perform, to do your best not to get distracted by other things. And I think that's really difficult. But an analogy that I was thinking of when I was reading this is, it's not necessarily in terms of a life's true purpose or something like that, but if you're wanting to start some side project or like hobby or something that's outside of work, and you say, okay, that's the thing that I want to go and strive towards. It's interesting that if you think about work, if you were to be given that same task by your work, you would probably accomplish that task, because there are boundaries put in place where you basically can't get too derailed, because it's like, well, we need this task, and so we need you to finish this task. And you kind of, in most cases, you figure it out. Maybe you have to say, okay, well, we can't do this portion and we can do this portion, and we have to figure out, okay, maybe we change this thing to look like that and do this. But you figure out a way to get that accomplished. But if you have some personal goal or project, often what happens is, as soon as something slightly difficult comes up, we kind of conclude, well, I'm just not good enough to do that, or it's too difficult or something, and we just give up, rather than being like, well, we have to try and get it done. That's the thing that we're trying to aim for, so let's go. Yeah, it was quite a rant there, so now you can go for it. Yeah.
No, I think just a few I think tying into what you said at the end of that, that's actually very interesting, to be like, you probably have set out and have accomplished many things at work that, you know, if you set out to do it yourself, you wouldn't have, because, like you said, there aren't those boundaries or those sort of somewhat guidelines to kind of like, you need to strive to the end goal. You know, when I think that's that's the hard part. I think thinking of our own endeavors to have some sort of deadline. I think we fail to do that, and so to me, it's also about reframing how we think about our purpose. And I think just as we were speaking and reading, it reminded me of. I'm very sorry. I'm bad at remembering book titles, but I know it's a book we've done about how it was. To kind of find your purpose, you need to have tried many things. The more you try different things, the more you sort of eliminate things. And just to tie that to that whole, I think
Wasn't it called Range?
It was Range, yeah. And then adding that to the whole, I think that was in 4,000 Weeks, to be like, if you have 20 things that you set out to do, the chances are, 15 of those actually are just more of a distraction than things that you actually want to do. So if you eliminate half of that, so if you go to 10 and can be able to cut down to 5, the chances are nothing in that power 15 was ever anything that you're gonna. And it goes back to and I'll say this, we have a mentality of making ourselves seem busy when we're actually not, by taking on so many things and saying that that's what you need to do, when in actual fact you actually don't do any of the things.
Yeah.
It's just the thrill of business that has become, I don't know, some people get a high out of it, and in essence, you actually missing the point. You're missing what you actually have to think through, and thinking through what your purpose actually is. Yeah,
no, it's not easy, but I think those general principles of saying, like, okay, choose some small set of things to aim towards. For Oliver Berkman, he normally says about 3 things, like choose 3 things and do those, and anything else, I think, what's his name, Cal Newport says a similar thing. It's like any of the other things, they can, you can only pull something new in once you've finished the other ones, or once you've purposefully decided, okay, I'm not going to do this, that is getting crossed off, and I'm abandoning that thing. But don't try and do 50 different things at the same time. Yeah. Okay, then the next is the thought factor in achievement. So I'm going to read through again some snippets. So starting on 45, all that a man achieves and all that he fails to achieve is the direct result of thoughts. Then on 46. A strong man cannot help a weaker unless that weaker is willing to be helped. And even the weak man must become strong himself. He must, by his own effects, develop the strength which he admires in another. None but himself can alter his condition. And then 49. Intellectual achievements are the result of thought concentrated to the search for knowledge, for the beautiful and true in life and nature. Such achievements may sometimes be connected with vanity and ambition, but they are not the outcome of those characteristics. They are the natural outgrowth of a long and arduous effort and of pure and unselfish thoughts. And then page 50. Achievement of whatever kind is the crown of effort. By the aid of self-control, resolution, purity, righteousness, and well-directed thought, a man ascends. By the aid of animality, indolence, impurity, corruption, and confusion of thought, a man descends. A man may rise to high success in the world and even lofty altitudes in the spiritual realm, and again descend into weakness and wretchedness by allowing arrogant, selfish, and corrupt thoughts to take possession of him. Then on page 51, victory is attained by right thought can only be maintained by watchfulness. Many give way when success is assured and rapidly fall back into failure. Yeah, so again, sort of coming down to not only your inner person is affected by your thoughts and your circumstances, but your achievements as well are affected by your thoughts. And only it's only, or not only, I suppose, it's thoughts that are good, that achieve good things. I guess usually it's not necessarily always the case, but I think in the majority of cases it's going to be that. And that the idea of the intellectual achievement that he speaks about there is an interesting one, because there's the aspect of that maybe you're pursuing that because of some vanity and ambition that is maybe not the healthiest thing. But at the same time, it's kind of like the good and the bad part, where it's not always purely good or purely bad, but the element that is good is the effort that one put into searching for truth and knowledge. That is good, and we sort of need to separate those two out, and we obviously want to strive for mainly the good and not the bad. But yeah, then the last part is the caveat at the end there to say, even if you have continued to grow and then you end up achieving the highest of heights, you must watch out, because that's the point when you might become, as he says, arrogant, selfish, and allow corrupt thoughts to take over. So I think we, like he says, we need to continuously be watchful of our thoughts, even in our achievements. So if we achieve something good, it may be because we've actually done something good and we've directed our thoughts in the right way. But that's not a sign of saying like, okay, we've reached it, now we can stop. We have to continue to refine our thoughts and make sure that we still, I guess, on that virtuous path. Yeah. Any thoughts from your side, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I almost want to say, my memory is a bit fuzzy today, but almost want to say that it was in this section they did that quote from, or reference to the Bible about those with much are trusted with much, and those with little are trusted with little. It goes along.
Could be,
those lines. But yeah, the reason why I also say that is about just to tie it into, and that's the section that stood out to be like, the strong can only help the weak if the weak is willing to be helped. You know, to me that was a good summation of what the section was trying to relay. You know, to be like, only when you start thinking about, let's say, achieving something or thinking positively about something, are you able to be more receptive to anything that will propel you in that direction?
yeah.
You know, literally, as it's this, I think the start was just so much a slap across the face to be like, you know, your thoughts your success is a result of your thoughts, and so are your failures, you know. And I think it's true. I mean, when we find ourselves in situations and you have one thing that you think might deter the whole situation, so often it is a curse, you know. So yeah, I think we do need to give much thought into what we do, you know, because that will be what results in our failure or success.
Yeah. Yeah, and another analogy is with this the strong and the weak, and the weak only being able to be helped by the strong if they are willing. I think, like, even if you just play that out in like an actual strength thing, not even a mental strength or learning something sphere, you can't, if you want to get strong and you go to someone else that is strong and they've been going to gym for years and things like that, and they know how to train and do all those different exercises, you can't just say to them, okay, can you help me? I want to become strong. Help me become strong. I don't want to have to do anything. Just help me become strong. Like, obviously, that's a ludicrous idea. Like, you are going to have to, like, they can show you things and they can help you and guide you to put in the right exercises, to have a balanced sort of fitness regime and so on. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to do the work if you want to become strong. And it's no different with thinking positively or achieving some intellectual outcome or some business venture and so on. Yeah. You have to be willing to put in the work yourself.
Yeah.
Right. On to the next one. Vision and ideal. Visions and ideals. Starting on page 54. He who cherishes a beautiful vision, a lofty ideal in his heart, will one day realize it. Cherish your visions, cherish your ideals. If you but remain true to them, your world will at last be built. And then on page 55, the greatest achievement was at first and for a time a dream. The oak sleeps in the acorn. In 58. The thoughtless, the ignorant, and the indolent, seeing only the apparent effects of things and not the things themselves, talk of luck, of fortune, and of chance. They do not see the trials and failures, the struggles which these men have voluntarily entered into in order to gain their experience. They have no knowledge of the sacrifices they have made, of the undaunted efforts that they have put forth, and the faith that they have exercised, that they may overcome the apparently insurmountable and realize the vision of their heart. They do not know the darkness and the heartaches. They only see the light and the joy, and they call it luck. They do not see the long and arduous journey, but only behold the pleasant goal and call it good fortune. And then on 59, in all human affairs there are efforts and there are results, and the strength of effort is the measure of the result. Gifts, powers, material, intellectual, and spiritual possessions are the fruits of effort. And then lastly, the vision that you glorify in your mind, the ideal that you enthrone in your heart, this you will build your life by. This you will become, good or bad. Yeah. So, I suppose it's in some sense tied to the purpose idea, but the thing that you are striving towards, that's the thing that will take up a bunch of time in your mind. If you're wanting to become rich, it will take up a bunch of time in your mind. And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, you should be careful, because in some sense, if you continue to cherish that vision and hold that as an ideal, it's likely to become true. But if you're not careful, it could mean that you sort of throw your family aside to pursue wealth. And maybe that's not actually the vision or ideal that you should be pursuing. Not to say that money is completely bad, but yeah, I think you get the general principle. But yeah, and then there's that element of people just looking at the result and saying, oh, that person is lucky, or that situation was a lucky situation. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of effort that someone has had to go through to achieve the results that they achieved. Yeah. Any thoughts from your side, Peter?
No, I think you've covered most of it. And the only thing I can add is, what you're saying is like we, like you said, have to be careful. Like you're saying, if you're thinking about being or getting rich, get to that point of understanding also. And I think you spoke about it earlier, to be like, at what point have I crossed the line in trying to achieve this vision?
Yeah.
So I think we have to take stock of our thoughts in that regard, and also I think be very aware about how realistic the visions we're cultivating in our heads are or not.
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
Yeah, that's true. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
All right, then the last chapter is, and it's a short one, serenity. So I've got a point there on page 61 and then 62. So 61, calmness of the mind is one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom. It is the result of long and patient effort and self-control. Its presence is an indication of a ripened experience and of a more than ordinary knowledge of the laws and operations of thought. Then on 62, the strong, calm man is always loved and revered. He is like a shade-giving tree in a thirsty land, or a sheltering rock in a storm. That exquisite poise of character, which we call serenity, is the last lesson of culture. It is the flowering of life, the fruitage of the soul. It is precious as wisdom, more to be desired than gold. How insignificant mere money seeking looks in comparison with a serene life, a life that dwells in the ocean of truth, beneath the waves, beyond the reach of the tempest, and in the eternal calm. And yeah, that's the last bit. Serenity is a result of a well-formed character. As you become wise and realize different things in life, and you understand what is and isn't in your control. Ironically, both a lot isn't in your control, and then at the same time, a lot is in your control. But it's not worth being upset about or distraught about the things that aren't in your control, or the things that don't go according to plan. And yeah, that calmness of the mind, as he says, is one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom. And having that strong character, as he puts it as well, it's like a shade-giving tree in a thirsty land, or a sheltering rock in a storm.
Yeah, I think that first part that you read, I think when I was reading, for some reason, what jumped at me was just delayed gratification. That self-control, that calm mind, as you said, being the jewel of wisdom. Being able to not react immediately to things, rather, respond in a timely manner. It might not seem timely to others, but, respond with calmness, rather than, reacting to situation. I think, yeah, I mean, serenity in itself. I think it's alludes to like peace and quiet. When I read that, so I think, yeah, it's just important for people to maintain that. Yeah.
Yeah, and as usual, sometimes it can be difficult, but
Yeah.
to continue to at least strive towards that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's that whole thing of compounding, like if that's your natural progression, regardless of how tough of a situation you might find yourself, your response will be with calmness.
Yeah. Any concluding thoughts, Peter?
No, I'd say read it. I'm sure for some readers, though, read it in the time that it has taken us to do this.
Maybe even less, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it had a lot of good nuggets. I want to say I'll probably keep it as a bedside book and just
revisit every now and
randomly
again.
open a page and see what I can, view differently and depending on how I'm feeling. But yeah, as always, good read. Yeah, I think it found me in a time that I think I needed. How can I put it? I don't want to say reassurance, but rather a smack across the face. That, be careful about what you dwell on. Kind of getting me out. Because it's been a few months of one bad thing to the next. Not tragically bad things, but it's like disappointing news after the other. And like you said, we don't have to minimize what has happened, but it's then how we go moving forward from that point. Because naturally we will, take those knocks and, want to dwell on it instead of shining light in it or giving it more positive thoughts to be like, okay, this has happened, what's next, in a more positive light rather than to be like, the world is doomed. This is the next thing will be a failure as well. But yeah, I mean, even now when we read the section of saying our successes and our failures are closely tied to our thoughts, it's it's something that I think it is true. Like the moment you add doubt to something and dwell on that doubt, then the chances are, there will never be a turning point or see any positivity come out of that situation. So we need to be very vigilant when it comes to what it is we think and what it is we continue to ponder on. Because it really affects a lot of things. Affects what we achieve, affects our health, affects our character.
Yeah. I mean, I think from my side, it's just that idea of our character is the sum of our thoughts. Like who we are is what we think over time. And like you said, that affects all spheres of life. Even strangely, the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And so I think we just need to be wise about what we think about, as you said, and how we think about it. And in doing that, then, we have hope to, I guess, build a serene character and a virtuous character. And I think that that's a very good thing.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Peter.
Cool.
Until
Thanks,
the
Jim.
next one.
Yeah. See you then.
Cheers.